We are in the middle of Perek Zayin Iggeres HaTeshuvah on page Tzadik Zayin, opposite of page 192. So, after in the previous prakim explaining what Teshuvah is, meaning a complete acceptance of Oil Malchus Shamayim, the yoke of heaven, and a resolve, a resolution not to do Iggeres again, to be Mekabel Hashem as our Melech, and to listen to whatever He tells us. So we know what Teshuvah is. We also know what Teshuvah is trying to accomplish, the function of Teshuvah, and that is we're trying to restore the Hei Tata, Teshuvah, Tashuv Hei, we're trying to restore the Hei Tata to its proper place. So in Perek Zayin, the Alter Rebbe now moves into the how of Teshuvah. We know the what, we know the why, and now we need to know what the how is. How do we arrive at this place, this complete resolve to have Kabbalas Oil Malchus Shamayim, to accept upon ourselves the Malchus of Hashem, to do only mitzvahs, not to do Iggeres, and not to transgress the will of Hashem again? So the Rebbe says there are two steps that are necessary. Step number one, which we spoke about last week, was the idea of being Mo'eder Rachmim from Hashem, and Mo'eder also one's own Rachmim upon the Shechina, because of the Galus HaShechina, which we caused through our Iggeres. We caused the Shechina to come down and to have to give life and energy. The Pnimius Achayis, we caused it to have to give energy and enter the Gimel Klippus Atmeis, and also tremendous Rachmim and Rachmanis in our own Neshama, which also Yarda Me'igra Rama Labira Amikta, which came down from a high roof and fell into this deepest pit, the pit of Klippus. So that is step number one. Step number one to arrive at Teshuvah is to Mo'eder Rachmim, understand the tremendous Rachmanis of the situation which was caused through the Iggeres that a person has done. The second idea, the second concept, which Dr. Rebbe talks about we started talking about last week, and we're still in the middle of that conversation, is that we need to break the klipa. We need to break our ego. We need to break our heart. As Dr. Rebbe brings up from the pasuk, Zivchei Elikim Ruach Nishbara Leiv Nishbar. That Leiv, that Ruach Nishbara, in order to break the klipa, the Ruach HaTuma, which one has created through their Iggeres, the way to do that is through a Leiv Nishbar, is through a broken heart. And how do you arrive at a broken heart? By contemplating what you have done, contemplating what your Iggeres you have done and the Galus HaShechina that you have caused. So although the actual contemplation, what you're thinking about in point number one is somewhat similar to the contemplation in point number two, but the objective is different. The objective in the first point is to bring a person to have Rachmanis, which Rachmanis in general is a positive emotion. It's an emotion of closeness, endearment, affection. And now the same contemplation, the same Esboninos is meant to break one's heart, to feel remorseful, regretful, and to realize, be completely broken by the realization of what one has accomplished through the Iggeres that they have done. What have we done through the Iggeres? Again, Galus HaShechina, and also we have caused, in the words of the Alter Rebbe, if you look 6 lines from the bottom of page Tzadik Zayin, opposite of page 192, V'garam laker nishmasoi v'nafshei elikis. Through our Iggeres, again, this is part of the thought process that breaks our heart. We have caused us to uproot our neshama and our nefesh elikis, mechaya chayim baruch hu, from the source of all life, blessed be He, v'herida. And what have we done? We've taken our own neshama and caused it to descend l'makam hatuma v'hamavas, to the place of tuma and death, heinachalas ha-sitra achra, which are the chambers of the sitra achra, v'nasis bebechinas merkava aleim. By doing an avera, you've caused your neshama to be a merkava, a vehicle, a chariot to the klippes, lekabel mahem shefa v'chayis, to receive energy from the klippes, lashpia legufay, and thereby to transmit this energy to the body, as mentioned earlier. So by doing an avera, we've cut off our source of energy in elokus, in kedusha and holiness, and instead now we become attached to, we become linked and to klippas, and we receive our energy from klippas. And this is where we ended last week. And this is why our Chazal tell us, Mesechtes Brachos, Rishoyim b'chayeyim kriyim meisim. We know Chazal tell us, Tzadikim b'misasa and kriyim chayim. Tzadikim, even after they pass away, they are considered alive. And Rishoyim b'chayeyim, Rishoyim, even while they're alive, kriyim meisim. They're considered dead. Which, by the way, this gives us an interesting insight into the moment of passing, physical passing, when the neshama leaves the body. That in actuality, nothing happened. Think about that for a second. I'm talking about from the neshama's perspective. For the people left here in this world, a lot has happened, and there's the absence of a dear loved one, and it's a very painful event. But in terms of the neshama itself, in terms of the person from their own perspective, if the person was a tzaddik, they were alive, and they are alive. If the person was a rasha, they were dead and they are dead. So not much has changed over there. In other words, we decide our fate through our actions. We decide whether we're alive or whether we're dead. And that continues after the neshama leaves the body. And what does that mean? You know, the pasuk says, "Va'atem hadveikim b'Hashem elikechem chayim kulchem hayom." You who are attached, who are connected to Hashem, are alive. The definition of life is connection to Hashem. Hashem is the makar ha'chaim, and therefore, if we're connected, if we're dveikim b'Hashem, we're chayim, we're alive. A tzaddik is always connected to Hashem, so a tzaddik is always alive.
But sekulachem hayom, if you dveikim now, you davek, you with Hashem. Only hayom. If you don't davek hayom, so
you lose the dveikus, you lose the chayim. Yeah. What does that mean? Koloimar shechayim, the life of rishoyim nimshachim mimakim hamaves v'hatuma, as opposed to tzaddikim, who their life force, their energy is drawn from kedusha, which is the makar ha'chaim, the makar of life, and that's why they're considered alive. Rishoyim, where do they get their life force from? Remember, we said through Iggeres, we cut off our source, we cut off our connection to kedusha. Instead, we become a merkava and we receive our energy from klipa. And klipa is makam hamavis v'hatuma. That's the place of death and the place of impurity. So rishoyim b'chayeyim, even while they are alive, kaviyachol, they seem to be alive, but they're actually mesim. They're dead. They're connected to death. And all of these are the thoughts that a person is supposed to think into in order to have a broken heart. Pashat, I'm dead. I'm dead because of my Iggeres.
But a lot of Rashaim getting the sachar in their life. So this is their life.
That's not real life. The real definition of life is Kedusha's connection to Hashem, who is the source of life.
Yes, we know that.
Having another few dollars in the bank doesn't define life. Any Yid knows that. Life is Kedusha, life is Torah, life is mitzvahs. And someone who doesn't have that isn't alive, as the Gemara says. V'chein masher kasu, and the same thing is that which it says. We say this in Hallel. Lehameisim yahalalu v'goymer. We say in Hallel that the dead, they do not praise Hashem. The loikol yardi duma, not those who go down to the place of silence. But v'anachnu, we will bless Hashem mi'ata v'adolam for now and forever. Now, this pasuk raises an obvious question, an obvious problem. There's a concept called lo yig l'rosh. It's based on a pasuk. Shtema Malach says lo yig l'rosh cheref esehu, which means lo yig l'rosh means someone who mocks a poor person. You mock someone who lacks something. So the pasuk says lo yig l'rosh. If you mock a poor person, cheref esehu, what you've really done is you've really mocked, you've really disgraced as esehu, the one who created that person. But lo yig l'rosh also has halachic implications, and the primary halachic implication is that the ultimate rosh, the ultimate poor person, is a person who has passed away. Why is that? A person who passed away is in Gan Eden and is enjoying pleasure and bliss, tainug and oinig, which we can't even begin to imagine. Right? We've talked about this. We've talked about this in the past. We brought down the story of Acher. That when Acher, after he passed away, he wasn't allowed into Gan Eden, and he also wasn't allowed into Gehenna. It's the Gemara says in Chagiga. And Acher had one of Acher's students, Acher Elisha ben Avuya. He was a terrible person. He started off as a big Talmud Chacham, but ultimately he became a kofer and did terrible things. But Reb Meir, the great Reb Meir, was his student. And Reb Meir, who was aware of what was going on, he was aware that his teacher's neshama was in no man's land, was nowhere. So it says that Reb Meir davened. It says that Reb Meir said, "Mutav diladaini v'leisi la'alma da'asi." Reb Meir says it's better that he should be able to go into Gehenna, so that ultimately he should be able to go into Gan Eden. As painful as Gehenna is, it's worth it to go to Gehenna in order to be able to arrive at the pleasures of Gan Eden. So it says that Reb Meir davened that his teacher should go to Gehenna. It's an interesting concept. There are other people who daven that the teacher should go to Gehenna, but for different reasons. For different reasons. Reb Meir davened that his teacher should be able to go to Gehenna, so he should be able to be cleansed of all his averos, so he should be able to be zoicha to enter Gan Eden and to be able to be zoicha to be nana meziv hashchina, which is an incredible pleasure. And it worked. It worked. The Meir said, the Gemara says that the Meir says that when I pass away, I'm going to go and I'm going to beseech on my teacher's behalf by the Bezdin Shel Maila, and you'll see that my tefillah will be accepted if you'll see that smoke starts coming up from the kever of Acher. And that's what happened. The Meir passed away, and smoke started coming up from the kever of Acher, and that lasted for many decades. I mean, in other words, I don't know, maybe it's hard to know the exact cheshbon, probably somewhere around 100 years that he was in Gehenna. Acher. Until Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara finishes Rabbi Yochanan and davened, and for what did Acher do?
Yeah,
it was a kofer be'iker, and he also
most people 11 months.
There's certain exceptions to the rule, and there are those who I don't know. L'chayra. He collaborated with the Romans and their gezeres against the Yidden and helped kill Yidden. He was a terrible person. But ultimately, what we have from the story is something very interesting. The Ramban, in his Akdama to Sefer Eiv, the Ramban writes that 70 years of the Yisurim of Eiv was a wealthy person who lost everything that he had. And he lost his children, right? Terrible, with the most incredible Yisurim that a person can imagine. He said 70 years of the Yisurim of Eiv doesn't compare to the pain of one moment in Gehenna. That's what the Ramban says. And nevertheless, what did the Meir say?
He should go to Gehenna.
Mutav diladaini. It's for his benefit that he should go to Gehenna and have to suffer that excruciating pain of Gehenna in order to be able to arrive at the pleasures of Gan Eden. So we can only imagine how great the pleasures of Gan Eden are to justify that lengthy time in Gehenna when we understand how painful Gehenna is. Again, that one moment of Gehenna is more painful than 70 years of the suffering of Eve, which tells you how great the pleasure is in Gan Eden. And nevertheless, despite that, we say that the people who have passed away, they're Rashim, they're poor people. Nebach. Why? What's the Nebach? The Nebach on them is the Bameisim Chavshi. Chavshi min ha-mitzvahs, that a person who is dead can't do a mitzvah. So as difficult as life is over here in this world, and we all know the difficulties, nevertheless, we're the rich people. We're the rich people. In terms of pleasure, they have the pleasure. We have the suffering. But in terms of connection to Hashem and importance, cosmic importance, that's us over here when we do a mitzvah. Everyone in the Gan Eden, they would give everything away to be able to come down and to be able to do a mitzvah. And therefore the halacha is that in a Beis HaKvaros, you're not allowed to wear tefillin in a Beis HaKvaros. You're not allowed to learn Torah in a Beis HaKvaros. In a Beis HaKvaros, or all these halachas also apply if you're right near by Levaya, right near a dead body. You have to tuck in your tzitzis. And why is that? Because otherwise it's loig l'rash. You're mocking the dead person. So take a look. I can wear tefillin. You can't. I can wear tzitzis. You can't. Even you should know. Even.
Oil as well?
Even the talis that they put on the mess, they cut off one of the corners because a mess doesn't do mitzvah. So they cut off one of the corners, so it's not a kosher talis anymore.
I think this is the difference between Sfaradim and Ashkenazim. Sfaradim in the Beta Avel, they give food the whole day to make a brachot. Ashkenazim doesn't give.
We're not talking about Beis
No,
Avel.
I'm saying different.
Yeah.
They're saying the same thing. Iloeg larash. Ashkenazim said the Met cannot make brachot. When you make a brachot, you make him fun at him. Sfaradim said the opposite. Every brachot that you're saying, you elevate the neshama of the Met.
Okay. A pshat.
How do you define the connection when you do mitzvahs in this world as opposed to Binen Mitzvah Shechina in the world, I mean in Olam Haba? That's also...
By the way, this is what I'm saying is Mishnah Mefurash in Pirkei Avos, where it says,
I want to understand.
Yafe shah acha shal keiras ruach be'elam haba mikol chayei elam haza. That 1 hour of pleasure in the next world is greater than everything, all the pleasures we can experience in this world. And the same Mishnah then turns around and says that Yafe shah achas of tshuva ma'asim tovim be'elam haza mikol chayei elam haba. The 1 hour of tshuva and mitzvahs in this world is worth more than all elam haba. How do you reconcile that? The answer is, depends what you're talking about. You're talking about pleasure, pleasure there is greater. You talk about, is there anything more valuable than doing a mitzvah? There's nothing more valuable than doing a mitzvah. And the ultimate connection with Hashem, even though that we don't experience that pleasure here in this world, the ultimate connection with Hashem is to doing a mitzvah. So we have this concept of leig lirash. We don't want to mock the dead people. And nevertheless, every Rosh Chodesh, every Yom Tov, or whenever we decide to say that kapitel in Tehillim, we say, Lo yamesim yahaluka, the dead people die, they don't praise the Eibusher. Anachnu nevarach, we're gonna,
That would be
that's the ultimate leig lirash.
ultimate.
So the Rebbe explains for the top line of page 194. Einei kileig lirash chas v'shalom. This pasuk in Tehillim is not mocking the poor. Why? Because when it says Lei Hamesim, when it talks about the dead people, it's not talking about people who are physically dead. El Akavana al Rishoyim. When we say Lei Hamesim Yaluka, we mean the Rishoyim. The Rishoyim, they don't praise Hashem. We're talking about the Rishoyim Shebechayeyem Kriyim Mesim, who although they are alive, they're considered dead. And the Rishoyim, they can't praise Hashem. Why can't they praise Hashem? Shemevavula Ma'isam B'machshav V'zaris. Because from heaven, they confuse them and they throw strange thoughts into their heads. As long as they're Rishoyim, and as long as they don't desire to do tshuva, as is known. So we're saying we praise Hashem, but those people who are Rishoyim who are cut off, they're dead. They can't praise Hashem. They're not given the opportunity. They're disturbed. From heaven, they make sure they're disturbed. They can decide to do tshuva, but as long as they say they don't want to do tshuva, they're not doing tshuva, they're Mason. And all of this, again, is part of this meditation, this contemplation a person thinks to break the heart. And through the Iggeres that the person has to take this personally, through the Iggeres that I have done, I've cut off my neshama from my source, and therefore, b'chayeyem kriyim mesim, I'm a dead person, I'm a dead person walking. Le'ah mesim mihal luka is talking about me. This is the thoughts that a person has and takes to heart in order to break the heart, which is the second element in order to be able to arrive at tshuva. However, what did we just say before? This whole line of thinking and of reasoning is based on what Alter Rebbe says, that V'garam laker nishmasei, 6 lines from the bottom of the previous page. V'garam laker nishmasei v'nafshi l'kis mechayeh chayim baruch hu. You uprooted your soul from the source of life. Now, the uprooting of the soul, the neshama from the source of life, that's for someone who did a avera of kares or mitzvah b'dei shamayim. What if I never did an avera of kares or mitzvah b'dei shamayim? What if I only did small averas? I said lashon hara. Did a small avera, v'yisay Mr. Mincha. Did a small avera, v'yisay touch something that's muktzah on Shabbos. That's not. I moved something that's muktzah on Shabbos. That's not kares. So then I didn't. My soul isn't uprooted. So then this whole line of reasoning and thinking, and my ability to be able to have a leiv nishbar, l'chayra, it wouldn't work for me. So Alter Rebbe is going to say that the truth is that even if you never did any of the big averos, the kares and mitzvah b'dei shamayim, if you did many small averos, it can have a cumulative effect, which is similar, the same, as doing a big avera of kares or mitzvah bezdin or mitzvah b'dei shamayim. Let's do this inside. 4 lines from the top of page 194. V'af mishali avar el avin kares, and even someone who never transgressed an avera which is kares. Also never transgressed an Avera for which one is liable to have Misa B'dei Shamayim. Shahu, of all of the Avedas which are Misa B'dei Shamayim, what is the one that is the most common? And the most common is Hitzah Zer Levatala, the intentional emission of seed, Ukahai Gavna, or Avedas of that magnitude. Person never did those Avedas. Ella, I mean, you have to realize that itself is a very rare individual. But let's say there is such a person. Ella, that person only did Shar Avedas Kala, small Avedas. Afal Pikein, nevertheless, Ma'achar Shem Pigmin Benefesh, Beneshama Benefesh Alikis. These two, they cause a blemish in the Neshama and in the Nefesh Alikis. Ukimashal Pagimas Upsikas Chavalim Dakim Kiniskar earlier on in Perik, hey, the Alter Rebbe explains that the pasuk says Kichelek Hashem Amoy Yaakov Cheval Nachalosai, that our connection to Hashem is compared to a chevel. A chevel is a rope, and just like a rope is made up of many strands, same thing is that our connection to Hashem is also made up of many strands. Now sometimes we do a big avera which cuts the whole thing up. But every time we do an Avera, even a small Avera, we're cutting another strand. So if a person does many Averas, Yachali is Pigam. You can damage that rope, you can damage that connection, just like doing one Avera, Sheyesh Bekardes, a Misa. Just like an Avera of Kardes or Misa. So even if a person never was over Kardes or Misa, the possibility exists that he was Garam Laker Nishmase, that he still has uprooted his neshama from the source of life, and he's still Lehamesim Yahal Luka is on that level because the repetition, the cumulative effect of many small Averas and the snipping of little, imagine you have a big rope and you snip one little strand, another little strand, eventually what's going to happen is the rope is kaput. You sever it, right? Furthermore, the Alter Rebbe says, Va'akfilu b'kfilas cheit echad pamim rabis mo'id. Even if you do the same Avera one time many times, it can have a similar effect as one big Avera. And what's the proof for this? The Navi compares Averis to a cloud that blocks and darkens the light of the sun. Commissioner Kosov, as the pasuk says, when a person does teshuvah, Hashem says, "Machisi ka'av pishaecha u'cha'anan chatisecha." Right? The pasuk says, we say this on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Slichos. Hashem says, "I have erased like a av, which is a cloud, Pisha'echa, your Averis, Ucha'anam, like a cloud, Chateisecha." What is it between an Av and an Anan? So the Rebbe explains, Machis Yikav Pisha'echa, I have erased the Averis that are like a cloud. Hem Averis Chamurais, those are the severe Averis. Hamavdilim, that separate Min Pnimis, Hashpa, Shem Havaya, Baruch Hu, Nefesh Alikis. They separate between the Pnimi, we talk about the Pnimius Achayis of the Shem Havaya, and that, so when you do a serious Avera, so you have this thick cloud that separates between you and Hashem. Kavdolas Onon Av V'Choshuk, like a thick and dark cloud, Hamavdil Ben Hashemesh, which separates between the sun, La'aretz V'Ladaram Aleha, and the earth and those who inhabit it, Al Derech Mashal. And then the pasuk continues, what is that? What are the Avedas that are like Anan? Anan in Avedas Kala is Sha'adam Dash Ba'kevav. Anan are the small Avedas. The Avedas which, as Chazal say, the Avedas Sha'adam Dash Ba'kevav, the Avedas that we trample with our heels because we don't consider them to be very significant. Hamavdilim, and they separate Kavdalas Anan Kal V'Kalush, they separate Dinas and Hashem, like the separation that's created by a very thin cloud, Al Derech Mashal. There are different types of clouds. There are thick clouds, there are thin clouds. We all know you can have some days there's clouds outside, but it's bright. Some days there's clouds outside, and it's dark. The difference is the thickness of the cloud. If it's a of, then that really inhibits. Last night, I think it was around 7 o'clock, and I was driving with my wife, and it was mamish dark outside. I don't know if you remember what was going on that time. I told my wife, you should just realize that Shkia is in another hour. In other words, don't think that's night yet. But it passionately felt like it was already after Shkia. That was a of. There were of him. And Anan, obviously it's not as bright as it would be without the Anan, but ultimately it doesn't block that much. Now, let's take this example. Let's say a person puts opposite the light of the sun in the window. You put very thin sheets. A great amount. Ultimately, the cumulative effect will be they will make the room dark, like one thick blanket, maybe even more. The exact same thing as the nimshal. And all those averis that we look like as small averis, we tread upon them with our heel. Like, yeah, they might be, and we might be right, they might be small averis. And each one of them is only a very thin cloud separating between us and Hashem. But great, take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, put them all together, and what's going to be the result? Ultimately, the result is going to be like one thick cloud, and even more than that. So the result of many small Avedas, the cumulative effect, can be the exact same as one big Aveda, Zakaris Aveda, which means the separation, the complete cutoff between our Neshama and Hashem. The Rebbe always was very common. The Rebbe would try to bring a halachic application to everything. Find the application in halacha, because every concept has an application in halacha. So there's interesting halacha, which is brought down by the Iran, and then brought down in the Beis Yosef, the Taz, the Alter Rebbe brings it down in the Shulchan Aruch, which is, let's say that someone is ill on Shabbos, and the doctor says, we're talking about a sakanas nefashis, the doctor says this person needs to eat meat. Maybe the doctor said this person needs to eat chicken soup, chvis. The problem is, the only meat that there's around is treifa meat. So here are the options, the Shabbos. I can shecht an animal, and give the person kosher food, or I can give the person the treifa food. So which one, what's preferable? Interesting question. Now it would seem that it would be preferable to give the person the treifa food. Why is that? Because eating a treif, eating an avela is a lav. So it's a lav, but it's not a iser kares, it's not a misas bezdin. Whereas shechting an animal on Shabbos is one of the av malachas, it's a iser skila. So it would seem that it's preferable for the person to have the treifa food rather than to shecht the animal on Shabbos. But the halacha is not that way. The halacha is we shecht an animal on Shabbos. And why is that? So again, the Ran explains, and this is brought down in halacha, the reason is because when the person is going to eat the treifa food, every single kizayis the person eats, he's being over another iser deiraisa. As opposed to when you shecht an animal, so it's one iser, it's done once. So the ribui hakamus over here, the quantitative amount of isurim is machriya, and we say it's better to do one big avera. Obviously, we're not talking about really averas. When it comes Shabbos and there's a sick person, it becomes a mitzvah. But ultimately, still, we have to look from a halachic perspective. You know, when we do a mitzvah, we're trying to find the least objectionable way to do this mitzvah. Better to do the one iser skila rather than multiple Isser lav, even though that, again, Chilul Shabbos is a much bigger deal than eating treif.
But if you eat tameh, if you say you eat tameh, you metameh the goof.
That's true, but that's not the reason that the Ran gives. The Ran doesn't say that the reason why is because there's something special about treif. He doesn't say that. So what do we see from this? This is mamish. The Rebbe says this is mamish arayit. What the Rebbe is saying over it? The Rebbe says that many small averis. What's the words he uses? Is ma'afiles k'mei mechitza achas ova. They cause the separation. They darken. Like one thick separation, v'yeser, and even more. As we see, that the many averis of the many times, each time the person eats a kzayis of the meat, it's more than one chilul Shabbos.
However, if they don't give the person meets within a certain amount of time, he's going to die. So, what should the halachic poskim do if he only has seconds to decide?
There is no question. Obviously, the question only exists in the instance where there is enough time to go and shecht it.
Okay.
And because then the question is, both things being equal, then we do both. But if we're talking about that it's right now the person needs and the only thing available is treif, then the question doesn't begin. Then obviously, koach nefesh would demand that you give the treif right away. Yeah. Now, that Alter Rebbe says, this is true about all small averas. That every single small avera, the cumulative effect of the small averas is as big is the same and even more than a big avera. So just like a big avera cuts you off completely, many small averas can have that same effect. Weiter, 8 lines from the bottom. How much more so when we talk about the averas, the famous averas which Chazal talk about, averas that even though they seem to be small averas, and even though these are averas which the Torah, forget about, there is no chiyuv mitzvah, there is no punishment for these averas min Torah, and nevertheless, there are certain averas Chazal tell us that even though there is no punishment for it, there is no Mrs. Bezdin, there is no Kares, there is no Malkus, but you should know that these are on par with the worst averas. For example, Kemoi, halamas ayin min tzedakah. When a person is asked for tzedakah, and you look the other way, you don't give, you ignore a person who wants tzedakah. So the Gemara says in that Masechtas Ksubis that it's mamish like avodah zarah.
I have a question about that. There's somebody who I see on the street, it's not important where, every day he asks me for money.
Shaila for Rav.
Okay.
In other words, obviously, you have to know what the halacha is in a certain case. And I'm assuming that the continuation of your question is that you don't know what he's going to do with it. He's going to go buy drugs. No.
My question is, if I don't have the money, can I go to him and say to him, I'm sorry, I don't have the money today. Can I give you money tomorrow?
That's not.
If I have the money.
That's not halamas ayin min tzedakah. You're not avoiding tzedakah. You can't do the mitzvah.
Okay.
Yeah, and there are a lot of halachas involved over here, and this is not a halacha here. Okay. But ultimately, if this is an instance where you went to the Rav, where you looked at the halacha and Shulchan Aruch, it's an instance where halacha says you're not allowed to ignore the person, and you did. So the Gemara says in Masechtas Ksubis that this is tantamount to avodah zarah. Kamesha Kasov, the Gemara there brings their raya. The pasuk says, this is talking about a person who asks for a loan. He shamar lecha. The pasuk says in Parshas Re'eh, be careful. Peniyah davar im levavcha blial, that there should be something in your heart, that your heart should think a thought which is blial. Blial means bli oil, without a yoke of heaven. And as the Gemara says over there, blial that blial is avodah zarah. So the pasuk is telling you, be careful not to do something which is like avodah zarah. What's the punishment for halamas ayin min tzedakah, for ignoring a poor person? There isn't. If that person, let's say there's edim and witnesses, and they pull them to Bezdin, what's Bezdin going to say? You didn't have avera. You're not stoning the person.
I moved my eyes. I saw Ani here. Coming next to him, I moved to like this.
This is not the venue for the halachas. We can have another shir, another day with another person, and we can tell you what are all the halachas of when you're obligated to give tzedakah. And we all have to know these halachas because it's in the gay. But the point, it's not the nekuda. It's not. We're not getting into the details. The nekuda is that when a person is over this avera, so it's like avodah zarah. What?
Is a lav?
Yeah, it's a lav, but it's a lav which doesn't get punished. But Chazal tell us, even though there is no punishment for it, there is no kares, it's like avodah zarah. So obviously, just like avodah zarah cuts a person off, because avodah zarah is Mrs. Bezdin, cuts a person off from Hashem.
Why is it like avodah zarah? Why?
I don't know. It's a good question. If that's Chazal, obviously identified in it something which is parallel. Yeah.
What? What kind of characteristic of a Messiah?
It's a good question, and I'm sure they talk about it. Maybe the Marsha, if you have to look at it, it's a good question. But at the end of the day, Chazal equates it.
It's not only avodah zarah, shfichut damim and everything.
1 second. If I'm a saper, bignus chavera, he lashon hara, and how about saying something which is not nice about your friend, which is lashon hara? Which that the Gemara says very clearly in Erechin also. There's a whole sugi in Erechin where it goes into Ashkula, Kavei Dezara, Vigili Arayish, Vichas Damim. Lashon hara is mamish, tantamount to Kavei Dezara, Gili Arayish, Vichas Damim. Package it all three into one. Boom! You said lashon hara, you got it. What now? Let's say you got pulled to a bezin. Two Edom, they saw you, they warned you. There was asra. You said lashon hara. What does bezin say? You didn't have Aveda. Go to Tshuva. Again, there is no punishment. But Chazal tell us that this is a terrible, terrible Aveda. The Gemara says that someone who gets angry, it's the Kaveh Zara. So once again, here we have the anger also. These are all Avedas which don't have a punishment to them. Not Kardas, not Mises B'Dishamayim, and not Mises B'Dbezin, but Chazal tell us how terrible these things are. The same Mishi Yesh Begas Ruach. The Gemara says Masechta Soiter, right? That's someone who has an arrogant person. The Gemara there also says that it's tantamount to Tavei Zara, to Kfira, and the Gemara says many other terrible things about someone who has someone who's an arrogant person, a prideful person. The Kahena Rabbis B'Gemara. There are many other Avedas that the Rebbe says in the Gemara which they don't seem to be so major, and they're very major.
It's done very frequently.
And you want to go, what's the one Avera which we don't necessarily pay enough attention to, but is really major? The Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, Bittul Torah. Talmud Torah is the equivalent of all other mitzvahs, Averas combined. K'maimer Chazal tell us timely. Because this Maimer Chazal is in the Psichta Te'echa Rabba. The Chazal tell us Viter HaKadosh Baruch Hu Al Avodah Zarah V'chulu.
What Viter means?
Viter, the Eibishter, so to say, was willing to forego an Avodah Zarah. Mevater, yeah. Gili Arayish V'chas Damim V'lei Viter Al Bittul Talmud Torah. The Eibishter is Mevater, he says Avodah Zarah, Seder. He doesn't say B'Seder, but the Avodah Zarah, we can do something with that. Gili Arayish V'chas Damim, but Bittul Talmud Torah, that the Eibishter is not Mevater. The Eibishter is not willing to overlook, to forgive.
But there's a punishment for that.
So there, what's the punishment for Bittul Torah?
No, just learn more. That's it.
No, but the truth. The point is, these are Avedas again. Let's give a little context over here. Let's go backwards.
Yeah.
Alter Rebbe says that we're trying over here to break a person's heart and realize. And how do you break the person's heart? By realizing that through your Avedas you caused Galus Hashchina. And you, as we spoke last week, you took the head of the king, and you dumped it, you schlepped it into a toilet bowl. Good. Moreover, not only did you cause Galus Hashchina, but you also took your own neshama. Me'igra Rama. You took it from the highest place where it was, and you dumped it into
A pit.
what?
Into a pit, right?
Into a pit, into the lowest, into the lowest klippus, and you cut your neshama off from Hashem. And when you realize that, you cut your neshama off from Hashem, you're a mess. You're a dead person. That's a very, very sobering and heartbreaking thought. So Alter Rebbe says, but one second, what if I never did an Aveda which is Karis? So then I didn't cut myself off. So the first thing the Alter Rebbe says is, one second, even if you didn't do an Aveda which is Karis, you didn't cut yourself off, but nevertheless you did a lot of small Avedas. The cumulative effect of many small Avedas is the same as a big Aveda, so you did cut yourself off. Number two, the Alter Rebbe says, how much more so if you did, there are many Avedas that you think are small and they're not small at all. That little Lashon Hara that you said, or that when you got angry at your wife, and those little things, that gaiva that you had, which you're not ascribing that much significance to. You didn't eat on Yom Kippur. You didn't kill someone. All you did was spoke some Lashon Hara. You came home and you told your wife something nasty about someone at work, a little Lashon Hara. And Chazal tell us that's Avodah Zarah, Gili Arayish V'chas Damim. So again, the first thing the Alter Rebbe says is, even if they are small Avedas, the cumulative effect of small Avedas can be the same as a large Aveda. You cut yourself off. But then the Alter Rebbe says, a lot of times your assumption about what's a small Aveda and what's a big Aveda is totally off target. It's ein ganz nicht gerecht.
So the tshuva is much harder. It says,
Sorry.
The tshuva would be much harder to undo these avedas, like lashon hara.
That's not the point over here. It's not the point. The point over here is to arrive at Teshuvah, you have to break your heart by realizing the severity of what you've caused to your neshama. That's where we are right now. That's where we are. What Teshuvah for everything is the same. There's kapara. We spoke about this in the earlier program. Teshuvah and kapara. Teshuvah, the idea of Teshuvah is a complete Kabbalah Sel Malchus Shamayim. Yeah.
Why the Baal Tanya use here Talmud Torah Kenenet Kula? You didn't say Bittul Torah. Why Talmud Torah?
Because that's the lashon of Chazal. We say it in the morning.
You say Talmud Torah Kenenet Kula.
And therefore, if Talmud Torah is the equivalent, if is important as all other mitzvahs, then we understand just how terrible it is to be mevatel Torah. But he's using the words of Chazal, the words of the Mishnah. Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam is the words of the Mishnah.
It's easier for us if we say Bittul Torah Keneged Kula.
But then you wouldn't know what he was talking about, because that's not those words don't say in the Mishnah. This way he says the words of the Mishnah, from which we can infer how terrible Bittul Torah is. So, and now the Alter Rebbe says, once we understand this, that there are certain Avedas that are small Avedas, or that seem to be small, but in actuality these are Avedas that are like Aveda Zara, Gilirayah, Shvichas Damim, we can make sense of something else. V'lachein sidru b'krishma shalamita, and that's why Chazal were misader in krishma shalamita, l'kabel alav dalad Mrs. Bezdin v'chulu, to accept upon oneself the form Mrs. Bezdin. Again, I don't know in how many nuschos this is, but in the Nusach HaRizal, and the Nusach as the Alter Rebbe established it, so in Krishma, there's a whole Nusach that we say. It's Sunday, correct. A whole Yiratzin after the Vidui. So you say Yiratzin Mufanacha Hashem Elokeinu V'Elokei V'Yiseinu. And we're going to start this discussion in Mirta Hashem now. We'll finish this discussion in Mirta Hashem next week. We'll have a deeper understanding of this whole Yiratzin. So She'im Chatasi Avisi Pashati Lefanecha. That if I sinned against you, Pagamti Ba'is Yutshel Shimcha Gadol, and I was poigim, I blemished the letter Yud in your great name. I'm going to skip a little. Next week we'll do it more in a complete way. And therefore, I deserve to get skilla. I accept upon myself skilla. It's as if I've been stoned. And then we continue. And if I sinned, and I was poigim, I caused a blemish in the first day. And therefore, I deserve shreifa. You know, there are four Mrs. Bezdin. Why are there four Mrs. Bezdin? No, the numbers aren't random. It's because there's a Yud Kei Vav Kei, and certain Avedas are poigim in the Yud, certain Avedas in the Hey, in the Vav, and therefore, if I was poigim in the Hey, Hareini mekabel lai shreifa. I accept upon myself shreifa. Vareini ki'ilo nishrafti. It's as if I've been burned. V'im chatasi v'isi b'shati. It continues. Is Vav, then I get herek, and if oisei, I get chenek. And this is something. At night, we're doing teshuvah, so it's part of the teshuvah process, and we're talking about over here, we're trying to break ourselves, break our heart. But what does it mean? Imagine a Yid standing up and saying, today, Eibishter, if I did an Aveir and I'm chayiv skilla. I don't know, did you do any Aveirs today that are chayiv skilla? Did you do any Aveirs today that is a chayiv shreifa or herek? I mean, most Yidden, definitely from a Yidden on an average day, but nevertheless, every single, so you could say if, but still, it's like maybe say it once a month, once a year.
It's like tefillah instead of korbanot, the same thing.
Except that a korbanos is something that we want. Skilla is not something that we want necessarily. So, but now that we understand this concept, that there's many small Avedas which are the equivalent of Avedas for which we're chayiv, skilla, shreifa, hereg, and chenek. And we can look at ourselves on a daily basis and say, you know, if Aveda Zara is skilla, and if today I didn't, today there was a poor person on the avenue, I didn't give him money, so skilla, skilla.
And sometimes we do these terrible Aveirot, and we don't even realize we're doing them.
Meaning,
like, you think you just come home, to your friends or your wife and you talk about somebody at work and they're Jewish, you just committed a major Avera and it slipped your mind.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah. Well, obviously, if you didn't realize it, it's not the same. It's not the same chomer. It's not the same severity. But if a person was machal Shabbos by mistake or worse Avodah Zarah by mistake, it's still an avera and still needs a kapara. Yeah. Now, if you notice that of these averas that we're talking about over here, the averas sha'adam dash ba'akev of the averas that we think that they're small, but in reality they're not small at all. We have over here many averas that are bin adam l'chavera, and the reality is that for most Fruma Yidden, unfortunately, the reality is that averas bin adam lamakim, shmira Shabbos, keeping Shabbos. We're good at that. Our hand gets near a light switch on Shabbos, and suddenly you remember Shabbos, and right, you pull out a piece of cheese, and you remember, oh yeah, I'm fleshig. It's like ben adam l'chavere, doesn't have the same impact on us. It's dash ba'keva. So we have over here lashon hara. We have over here gaiva, anger. All these things are about, anger is ben adam l'chavere. Gaiva can also be ben adam l'chavere. And this is something which is very negated to the time that we're in right now. We're in the 9 days when we're approaching Tisha B'Av. And during this time we're mourning, obviously, Bavelos over the Churban Beis HaMikdash and the Galus. And at the same time, we're looking to rectify the mistakes that were made and the Averas that were done, which caused the Churban. So we know the Gemara famously says, in Mesechtes Yuma, the Gemara says, Mikdash Rishon B'nei Macharev. The Mikdash, why was it destroyed? B'nei Gimel Devarim Shahayabay, because they did 3 Averas: Avodah Zarah, V'Gili Arayis, and Shvichas Damim. Aval Mikdash Sheni, but the second Beis HaMikdash, Shayo Eiskin B'Torah V'Mitzvahs V'Gemilos Chasadim. The Yidden then were tzaddikim. They were learned Torah. They did mitzvahs. They were Eisik and Gemilos Chasadim. B'nei Macharev, why was it destroyed? B'nei Shaheisu B'Yi Sinas Chinam, because there was Sinas Chinam. L'amedcha to teach us Sheshkula Sinas Chinam Keneged Shalosh Avedas Avodah Zarah Gili Rayis Shvichas Dam. Sinas Chinam is the equivalent of Avodah Zarah Gili Rayis and Shvichas Dam. And by the way, this is not only something the Gemara tells us and set up Sanamuna. Anyone who learns a little history knows the reason why the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, why Yerushalayim was conquered, was because there was a lack of unity in Klal Yisrael at that time. There was factions, they were fighting each other, and the Yidden were killing each other, and they were giving each other over to the Romans. The Gemara tells us about how some Yidden burnt down the storehouses of the other Yidden. There was a complete disunity amongst Klal Yisrael. That's what the Gemara says. And then, a few lines down, the Gemara says something else. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yechon and Rabbi Lazar da Amri Tevayu. Rabbi Yechon and Rabbi Lazar, both of them say, Rishonim, the first ones, in other words, the people in the first Beis HaMikdash, Shenizgala Avoinam, we know what their Avera was. It was revealed. Nizgala Kitzam. Therefore, they also knew when the Galus was going to end. Before they went off into Galus, they already had the Nevuah of Yirmiyahu, that 70 years, L'charvis Yerushalayim, 70 years later the Gula would come. Achreinim, the second Beis HaMikdash, the last one, Shalei Nizgala Avoinam, their Avera wasn't revealed. We don't know what their Avera was. Shalei Nizgala Kitzam. So therefore also we don't know when Mashiach is coming. And here we are, the Pale. 2,000 years later. Think about it. For Avodah Zarah Gili Rayis Shvichas Damim, 70 years. For Sinas Chinam, 2,000 years. But what does that mean? What do you mean Lein is Gala Kitzam? That their Avera wasn't open, wasn't revealed. The Gemara says a few lines earlier, the Avera was Sinas Chinam. Narvas's Pshat, the Rebbe explains in a Maimer that the nature of Sinas Chinam is that it's always a hidden Avera. Because the person who is guilty of it is never aware, or almost never aware, that they're doing an Avera. Because they're right and the other person's wrong. When a person, it's Leinis Gala Aveinam. It's Mamash Hazay. It's Mamash Hazay. Go to any machlekes there is in Klal Yisrael, and each person thinks that Mamash, this is L'man Hashem. There's a letter from the Alter Rebbe. So the Alter Rebbe writes to one of his chassidim, actually, by the Rebbe's wedding, they gave out, the Frierdiker Rebbe gave out a tshura, gave out like a memento. And there's a ksav yad of a letter from the Alter Rebbe, a copy of a ksav yad. Which back today, to make a copy of a ksav yad is a big deal, but then back then, this was in 1929 or 1928, but they made a copy for everyone. And it was this letter. The Alter Rebbe writes the chassid of his name is Ramesha Valenker. He says the most you should stay away from is machlekes l'shem shamayim, because the whole galus is because machlekes l'shem shamayim. It's for the Eibishter. Not only am I not doing an avera, I'm doing a mitzvah. And that's what means l'nisgal aveinam. That these averas, the reason why they're so tricky and so devious and so hard to get rid of, and here we are 2,000 years later and we're still trying to deal with it, is because it takes a moment of maturity and a moment of sanity and lucidity to realize that genukshain, we have to stop with the machlekes, and I'm not only talking about the big machlekes and between this community and that community. That's the bigger people. It's always easy to say machlekes. No, between me and my brother, me and my neighbor, me and my friend, me and my wife, me and my right, and we have to stop it.
If someone's doing something wrong, you have to protest it. So what do you mean here exactly?
When you go and you protest something, you're always... I'm not saying it should never be done, but it's very risky. Being nice to another person is never risky. Never risky. It's always, when you're nice to another person, you have Avos Yisrael. Alter Rebbe says in Perek Beis Tanya, he says, be mekarer with Ava, and if it doesn't work, so mitzvah Avas Reim Leihivsid. You didn't lose out on the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael. Yeah. Chesed is always the safer path than Gevurah. When you're going with Gevurah, when you're going with your the risk that your ego is involved and that your Yetzer Hara is involved, the Sinas Chinam is involved, is very, very large. You have to think 20 times before you go and you say a Shver Avart on another Yid. And the same thing when it comes to Lashon Hara. The Alter Rebbe talks here about Lashon Hara. And what's so insidious about Lashon Hara is that I would say that, once in a while someone comes over to you and says, yeah, you know what I heard about this person? And let me tell you. And you're like, that's Lashon Hara. That's, stop it. Either you stop it beforehand, or after you hear it, you stop it. But that's the 5% of Lashon Hara. The 95% of Lashon Hara is said in the course of conversation, and there's a reason why you're saying it. And the Meretzachan, you convince yourself it's to benefit the person who you're talking about, or that it's to save someone, and at the end of the day, it is so easy to have the best of intentions and run afoul of Lashon Hara multiple times every single day. And Lashon Hara is a huge thing. And here we are in the 9 days, and we're sitting and we're waiting for the Geula. And we're wondering why we're in Galus so long. And you have the pasuk in Shemois where it says that after Moshe Rabbeinu grows up, so he goes out and he went the first day he went out and he killed the Mitzri, and on the next day, so it says that he sees the two people are fighting, and Halargeni ato emek sharaktos ha-Mitzri, and Vayira Moshe. And he said, so what does Rashi say on this? Moshe was scared. He says, now it's been found out. So Rashi says, he brings that from the Medrash, that dog loy al shirab Yisrael rishoyim dil turim. You saw that the people speak Lashon Hara. People are busy passing around negative information. How did these two people know that he killed someone? A bunch of people are passing around. There's a Bali Lashon Hara around. Amar, he says, Ma'ata Shema Einim Ruim Legal. Maybe now the Yidden won't be worthy of Gula. It's an interesting thing. We know the Yidden in Mitzrayim, we know that they were in Memtesh Shari Tumah. We know they were Eved Avodah Zarah. The Rambam in Hilchos Avodah Zarah, the Rambam talks about it. The Medrash says that when the Yidden were going through the Yam Suf, the Malachim turns to the Eibishter and say, why are you saving these people, not these people? Allah Eved Avodah Zarah, Allah Eved Avodah Zarah. But that wasn't the problem. The fact that they were Avodah Zarah wasn't a problem. Why did Moshe think they weren't worthy of Geula? Because of Lashon Hara. Think about the context of our Tanya, where you think Avodah Zarah is a big Avera, Lashon Hara is a small Avera. But here Moshe was saying, now I understand why we're not worthy of Geula because of Lashon Hara. What's Pshat? So the Rebbe explains, when a person speaks Lashon Hara, several things are happening over here. On the most practical level, you're harming the person who you spoken about. You're harming their reputation. You might be harming them financially. As the Gemara says also, that right, Lishna Tlisoi, Kotl Tlisoi. The Lashon Hara kills three people. Kills the person who says it, the person who listens, and the person who is spoken about. Simple harm. On a deeper level, the Rebbe explains, speaking is the idea of revelation. When you speak, you're revealing something which was hidden within yourself, in your mind, in your heart. When you speak something, you're revealing it. When you speak negatively about another person, what you're doing is you're identifying, isolating something negative about the person, and you're revealing it. And that has a negative impact on that person. If I say that person is an angry person, I'm actually making the person angrier because I'm bringing that part of him deeper or more out from its potential and bringing it out into revealed state. There's a spiritual damage that's done every time you speak negatively about another person. You're partially hurting the other person. And I do have to interject over here, but the same is true also the other way around, that when you speak positively about another person, when you medaber b'shvach haverei, not only do you benefit another person practically, but actually by you speaking positively in the praise of another person, you're revealing their positive potential. And that doesn't make a difference whether anyone hears you saying it. It's not about the practical effect. We're not talking here about physical laws of nature. We're talking about spiritual laws of nature. So you could say something positive about another person. You could send another person. The person can be far away, can be overseas, and can be in a difficult situation. And you send support and positive words and say positive things about the person, and it actually has a positive impact on the person.
Even though he doesn't know.
The person doesn't know about it, never will know about it. Hopefully one day the person will, you say something, I don't know, maybe the same thing works if you write an email, whatever it may be, but al kapanim, articulating, expressing something good about another person helps the person. Articulating something bad about the person is negative for the person. And then there's a third thing about Lashon Hara, which is that we're Am Yisrael, we're a nation. And as a nation, we're supposed to be united. And Lashon Hara is the ultimate form of disunity. One person is talking bad about another person, the other person talking bad about the other person. You lose the cohesiveness of a nation. When the Eibishter went and he took the Yidden out of Mitzrayim, Atav v'chartano, and he chose us as his nation. Why did he choose us? So this is something we discussed in Tanya and Perek Memtes. Why did he choose us? Because that's what he wanted. There is no reason. Yeah, halal lo eved avodah zara, halal lo eved avodah zara. But it was Bechira Chavshis. It was the Eibishter's choice. He wanted us. Atav v'chartano mikol ha'amim, he chose us. So we did Avodah Zarah, okay. Other Avedas we did, okay. We harmed other people through speaking badly about them, also okay. That's not what's impeding, and that's not what's stopping the Geula. There's one thing that could stop the Bechira of Hashem choosing us as an Am Yisrael, and that is if we're not an Am. If we're not a nation. If we're not a nation, then there is no nation. The Eibishter wants a nation. The Eibishter wants to choose a nation. And if we're busy saying Lashon Hara about each other, then we're just a collection of people. We're not a nation. We're not an Am. And when Moshe sees that people are saying Lashon Hara, he says, now I see why we're not royally goyal. Not because we didn't have Avera, but because with Lashon Hara we're not a nation b'chol. And when I get to the Gula Sida, we say, Ki meit seischa me'eretz Mitzrayim arenu neflois. The Gula Sida in many ways compared to the Gula of Mitzrayim. And here we are again, 9 days, awaiting, anticipating Mashiach, and we have to realize that we want to, again, we want this, the Atav V'chartanu in an even greater and grander form than it was the first time, and we have to realize we need to strengthen our connection to each other as a Am, as a nation, as a cohesive unit, and we're all one nation. Whether we're, you're Chassidish or Litvish or Yeshivish or Ashkenazim or Sfardim or Frum or not yet Frum, it doesn't make a difference. We're one nation, and we have to talk positively about each other. And the words of the Rambam, which we had in this past week, to speak b'shvach haveri ve'eni medaber b'gnusei klal. A chacham is someone who speaks good about others and doesn't speak negatively about others, period. We don't speak about others negatively. We don't think about others negatively. We reinforce our cohesion as a Am, and when we do that, this Tisha B'Av will celebrate as the ultimate Yom Tiv in Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim Yerakedesh together with Mashiach Tzidkenu. Shabbos everyone.